Today I'm going to be photographing the brand new Tesla Roadster. Kind of. This is the 1/18th scale die-cast model by Tesla. This thing cost me $250, and my hope is that I can photograph this and make it look like a real car. The shots that Tesla has already taken of the real Roadster look okay. This is the next best thing. So let's see if I can make this toy look like a real car. Now, this is a continuation of our sponsored tutorial series. These videos are 100% free to you, and in these videos, I'm just going to be using gear donated by different sponsors. Today, we have 4 different sponsors. We're gonna be using cameras and lenses by Fujifilm. We're going to be using strobes by Profoto. We're going to be using a tripod by Manfrotto. And finally, at the end of this video, we're going to be using Exposure X5 software to put the finishing touches on this photograph. Let's get to it. Now, this is actually the second time I've photographed a toy car and tried to make it look real. The first time I went the simple route. I took a picture of a car and put it on a nighttime scene. That's a lot easier to do, and you can kind of hide a lot of the imperfections. Now, for this shot, I want it to be brightly lit. I want it to be a daytime looking shot. I also spent $250 on this model, so there's a lot more detail in this car. I think we have a much better chance of making it look real during the day. At least that's the hope. Now, I'm working in reverse. I'm making it really difficult for myself, but if you already have your background plate shot, you already know the direction of your lighting. You know if you have a big bright sky above the car, you could use a softbox. You know if the sun is going to be coming and hitting an angle of the car. You know the camera height. You know if you're going to be shooting down on the car. You know if you're going to be really low to the ground. You also know what's going to be below the car and what's going to be right behind the car. For example, you wouldn't want to take a picture of this toy car on white paper if you're going to be placing this car on dark asphalt. It's going to reflect that white paper in the toy car, and then when you put it on the dark asphalt, it's just not going to make sense. So that's going to be something that you really need to consider. The other thing is what is directly behind the car. For example, you wouldn't want to shoot this on white seamless if you're going to have blurry trees in your final image. Those blurry trees are going to reflect in the paint. And what you can actually do is create blurry trees in Photoshop, print them out on a sheet of paper, put that directly behind the car, and photograph that. And even though it might look cheesy in the test shot, the reflections in the paint are going to look much more realistic, and you can actually composite the car a lot more easily. Now, you may be wondering, why, Lee, if you're giving me this advice, aren't you taking your own advice? Why don't you have that background plate picked out? And that's because I actually want to get 2 different final images with one shot of this car. I'm going to do one graphic looking image of this car, and then I'm going to cut this car out, and I'm going to put it on a real life scene. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to work through these issues in post and get the perfect background plate later, but let's go ahead and start shooting this car. All right, let's talk about our first sponsor. This is the Manfrotto 055 XPRO 4 tripod. This is a carbon fiber tripod. We've been using it for quite some time now. Incredibly lightweight, but also sturdy. I've mentioned it before, guys. My favorite feature of these tripods is the fact that you can remove the center column and it will rotate 90 degrees. So if you were photographing something straight down, we do this all the time with product photography. This is a lifesaver. We're not going to be using this feature today, but it's definitely worth noting. And then for the tripod head, we have the Manfrotto XPRO ball head. This is a very sturdy setup, and it's incredibly important that this is very sturdy because we might be doing light painting. I don't think I am for this shot, but when you're shooting products, you're going to be taking so many different images, and you do not want that camera to budge at all. So having a sturdy tripod for work like this is incredibly important. Now, for my camera, I am going to be shooting with the Fujifilm X-T3. This is a crop sensor camera, but this camera has been really awesome for us recently. We've been using it for both stills and video. The video out of this camera looks really, really good. You'll see we have a really long video tutorial coming out where we actually shoot a video commercial. We've done a lot with this, and I'm very impressed with the way this camera works. Now, the lens that I'm going to be using today is the 50 to 140 millimeter lens. On this camera, it's approximately a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. Keep in mind that this might be a little long for toy car photography photo shoots. You want to be a proportional distance away from the car to replicate the shot in real life. For example, if I was shooting this car in real life, I would be about this big. And if I was riding along next to the car, maybe in a chase vehicle or something, I would be pretty close to this car. and I would have to shoot with a wide angle lens. You can actually see here the shot that Tesla has on the box that this toy came in. They were shooting with a very wide angle lens. They were extremely close to the cars. I'm not going to be getting that warped out looking shot today. Instead, I'm going to be backing up and zooming in, and I'm hoping that my final image will look like I might be up on top of a hill shooting down on the car. We're not going to get that warped out shot where the back of the car is really big and the front of the car is really small. I'm going to compress the car down, and hopefully I'm going to be able to make it look realistic when I get the perfect background plate later. Now, what are we going to be placing this toy car on? I've done a few different test shots. I took pictures of it on white, I took pictures of it on gray. I also took pictures of the car sitting on different laptops that I own, and I really like the way the aluminum looks in these new laptops, but the problem is the laptop isn't quite big enough, and I was having a really hard time extending that laptop. It was making things very difficult. So I went to Walmart and I found a non-stick cookie sheet, and it has a very similar look to the new MacBook. And in fact, I actually like it a little bit more because it's darker gray. It's a little bit more of a realistic tone when you compare it with asphalt. So I think this is going to look great straight out of camera, but it's also going to give us a realistic shadow and reflection in the car when we cut out the car and composite it into another background. So we have the cookie sheet as our ground, but what is going to be behind the car? Well, I'm actually going to be shooting down at the car at an angle, and I want my first shot to be this graphic looking image. So I am going to place white paper across this entire table here. That's going to give us a really clean background. We're going to be able to cut it out if we want to. I can almost guarantee you this is going to cause us problems in our composite image later on, but this is going to give us the cleanest shot straight out of camera. So let's get that white paper. Okay, so let me tell you about my basic composition here. I'm using the cookie sheet as a line along the back of the car, just like a real road would be. And I love this cookie sheet because it's got incredible detail. It's about the same density as real road, but it's also giving me this really beautiful reflection of the car in the cookie sheet, as well as a beautiful reflection of the cookie sheet in the car doors itself. So basically what I've done here is I have placed the car on the cookie sheet. I have the cookie sheet running diagonally through my frame, and behind the car, I've got just pure white back there. I think that's going to create a really beautiful graphic image. It's also going to make it easy to cut the car out. Again, not the most realistic reflections on the top of the car, but hopefully we can deal with that later. What I need to do now is tackle my lighting. I'm going to try to go simple for once in my life. I'm going to try to use one big light, and that's it. Now, the light stand I'm going to be using today is the Manfrotto 420B. This is not specifically a sponsor, but I do love this tripod. It gets incredibly tall. You can just keep going up and up and up with this thing. I mean, we can go all the way past the ceiling in this room. But why I like this so much is because it's a light stand and a boom stand in one. So you can come up here, rotate this to the side, and now it becomes a boom stand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to boom my light over the top of this car. It's going to create realistic soft light from above, very similar to a cloudy sky or something like that. So let's set this up. Now, the light that I'm going to be sticking on the stand is the Manfrotto B10. As you guys know, if you've seen any of our other videos, this is my favorite light of all time. It's so small. It's so powerful for its size. It's battery powered and it's AC powered as well. So I think this shoot's going to be relatively quick. I'm probably not going to need the AC power, but if I were doing a shoot like this and I was going to be working for hours and maybe I wanted the modeling light to be on, all you have to do is plug it in, and then if you ever need to move it and maybe you don't have a plug or the cord's not long enough, you just unplug it and you have hours of battery life built in. The other great thing about this light is it has the Manfrotto air remote system. You can see I've got the air remote up here on my Fuji X-T3. This system is just so simple. It works every single time. So much more reliable than the old Pocket Wizards I used to use. Now, we wouldn't want just this small flash head lighting this car. That wouldn't be realistic at all. In the real world, if the car were outside, it would be lit by the entire sky. Maybe the sun also, but definitely the entire sky. So what I'm going to do to replicate that is lift this light up, put a large softbox on it, and hopefully light up this entire table evenly. All right, so I've got the softbox in place, and now it's time to fine tune the lighting. I have the modeling light on so I can actually see the reflections in the car. It looks good, without really doing much, but I do want to fine tune things. I think it would look nice in my finished image to have the shadows cast towards the camera. It would also be, I think, a little bit more realistic looking that way as well. It's going to give us that shadow that we can really mount the car to our background plate with a little bit more easily. If the light is directly overhead, sometimes it just casts those shadows straight down and it doesn't look quite as realistic when we get into post. So I'm just going to move this around until I can get the best reflections on the car without losing the highlights on this side door that my camera can actually see here. Now, because I have this giant softbox right over the top of the car, it's lighting up the car. I'm getting beautiful highlights across this thing, and everything else in this studio is so dark that it's not showing up in the car. That's perfect. That's what we want. I don't want bright things off to the side showing up in the paint. It's going to give me a lot more work when I get into post. You can see when the light's right here, it's pretty much just casting shadows directly underneath the car. I don't think that looks very good. When I push the light back, you can see it starts casting the shadows towards the camera. I think that looks much better. All right, so I think we're ready for my first test shot here. Camera settings, ISO 80, 1/250th of a second. That's my fastest sync speed. I'm going to be shooting at f11. We might have to focus stack, but we'll test that in just 1 second. Let me take a test shot here, and let's talk about the composition. So we have the angle of this road or pan kind of going at this diagonal line here. I think it's really graphic. I think it's an interesting leading line. I also have the car following the angle of the pan or the road perfectly, and I've turned the front wheel. I think it looks nice. I like car photography where you can see the wheels a little bit better. If we zoom into this shot, it looks like it's all in focus, but if you look really closely, you will see that the back of the car is in focus, and once we get to the front, it starts to go blurry. Now, this would never happen in real life, especially from the distance that we are replicating here. Remember, we're supposed to be like up on a hill shooting down on this race car. So there's no way we would have such shallow depth of field. So we have to get this all in focus. To do that, I'm going to focus stack. So I'm going to take a picture of the back wheel of the car. I'm then going to move over, take a picture of the center of the car, the front of the car, and then I'm also going to take a picture of the far end of the car, the furthest part from the camera. I don't know that we need all of these focus stacks, but it's just going to give me options when we get into post. Now, I have to say, these shots look pretty good right out of camera. That's my goal here. I wanted simple lighting. I wanted this to look really cool. Straight out of camera, we can do just a little bit in Photoshop, but I'm hoping that we've also simplified the light enough that it's going to give me options for a big composite as well. Let's get into Photoshop and find out. All right, guys, we are here in Photoshop, and this file is probably going to take a lot of work. I'm going to show you everything that I'm doing, but this is going to be heavily edited because I don't want this video to be 4 hours long. This is the shot straight out of the camera, and I think this looks pretty good as it is. Obviously, I could easily, cut out this black part where you can see the softbox up here, make all this white, maybe extend this gray part out a little bit, and this would look pretty good as it is. But I want to do a lot more work to this file. I think we can get it looking a lot better. The first thing that you'll notice when we zoom in is there are little dust specks everywhere. We need to clean all that up. There's also dust specks on the car. And obviously there would be dust specks in a real car, but they would never be this size, right? I mean, these are pretty large if this was a full-size car. So we have to clean all that up. The other thing that I've noticed is we're having some issues with depth of field here. Most of the car is nice and sharp and in focus, but of course the front of the car here, you can see this edge isn't very sharp. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up another file where we focus on a different part of the car, and let's mask this spot in. Now, the first thing I want to do is make sure that these shots are perfectly lined up. I'm just going to lower the opacity on this top layer and just move this around a little bit. I can use directional keys here, and basically I'm just trying to get it perfectly lined up. That looks pretty good. I am then going to hold Alt and click on the mask button down here. and that's going to create a mask that's black. We're going to get the white paintbrush. I'm going to set that to white. And what I'm going to do is simply paint in the areas that I want it to be a little bit sharper. I'm just revealing that sharper layer below. Back here you'll notice too, you get that a little bit sharper. Here we could get a little sharper. And then of course, all the ground. Can you see that? All that detail's revealed there. So I'm just gonna paint all of this ground back in with this other shot here. Okay, that works. I am then going to crunch all of this down into one layer and just call it focus stack. So I'm going to hit Control Shift Alt E. That's going to create a new layer, and I can just name this focus stacked. Now, the next thing I need to do is clean up all of this dust. And to do that, I'm just going to use the spot healing brush here. I like creating another layer on top. You can just hit Control Shift N if you want. It'll create a new layer. Then you can click on Sample All Layers up here at the top. And when we click, what it's going to do is just create a perfect layer on top with all of these fixes. Give me about 20 minutes. I just have to go around and fix all of these little dust spots all over this image. All right, now if we look around here, you can see this car looks much, much better. We've gotten all the dust off of the ground and off of the car. I think we're ready to move on to the next step. Now my goal for this shot is to create two different images using this one shot. I want one with the car on the pan, just leave it as it is, and then I want to cut the car off of the pan and I want to be able to put it on some other background. For both shots, I'm going to need to cut this car out, and to do that, I'm going to be using the pen tool. Now, there's a million tutorials online. If you don't know how to use the pen tool, watch one of those tutorials. This is a very important tool in Photoshop. You're gonna use it all the time. But the basic premise with this tool is that you can create very detailed shapes and cut almost anything out perfectly. Give me a second and I'll be right back. Now, I've created two different paths here. One is the top of the car along with the way this road or pan should extend. This is going to make it really easy for us to change out this background or wall behind the car. I also have cut out the car here as well. Now keep in mind, whenever you make a path, you need to rename that path. If I have this path selected and then I try to create another path, you'll see that it adds a path to this path. We do not want that to happen. So I want to click off of this path. I could create another path here, and you can see it's called work path. I definitely want to change the name of that. So I would call this something like circle. Obviously I don't want to keep this, but this is how you keep track of all the paths that you're going to create. And for this picture, I'm going to have to create a lot of different paths, so it's good to stay organized here. I'm just going to drag this down and delete this. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is I am going to click on this path that I've created that kind of separates the top and the bottom. And I'm going to right click, make selection, and I'll just do a 2-pixel feather. You don't want a perfectly straight line. Obviously we want just a little bit of feather. And you can play with that depending on how much resolution is in your file. And then I can go back to layers, hit Control Shift N to create a new layer. And then I can grab a paintbrush with white and I can just paint this in. And you can see I've actually done the opposite of what I want to do here. So I'm going to undo that and I'm going to select inverse. So that's going to select this part, and then when I paint in, you can see it will grab only the top part and it won't let me paint on the car at all. So let's deselect this and zoom in and see what this actually looks like. So that looks really, really good. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, the next thing that I need to do is figure out how to extend this pan out. And you can see I've got a little area down here I need to fix, down on this side as well. I've also extended out this canvas. It's gonna give me some more options in a little bit. Don't worry about that. All right, I took a couple blank shots of the pan without the car, just for this reason, in case I needed a clean pan to add to the background here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this behind the car. Remember, all we're trying to do is fill in this area right here. I'm going to go back to that path that I created. I am going to make selection. And then I am going to create a mask on this top layer here, and I'm just gonna paint out this area right here.
You can see this gives us the option to kind of, not that layer, this layer, push it around and get it right where we need it. And then of course we've got some density problems here. We can go in and just change the levels a little bit and darken that up to get it to match. All right, now I think I'm going to tackle the inside of the car. You'll notice that it looks a little rough in here. The detail on the dashboard is so big, that definitely makes it look like a toy. The screen looks horrible, and obviously we can see little details along this that look cheap as well. Let's see what we can do by grabbing real photographs of other Teslas that we find online. All right, here is a photograph of, I think, a Tesla Model S and the center screen here. This obviously looks much, much nicer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this out and paste it in here. Let me show you how I'm going to do that. Because this is square, I'm just going to use the polygonal lasso tool. And we'll just grab it like this. The other thing is this is so small that it really doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to copy and paste with Control-C and Control-V. And then I'll just delete this layer out. And you can see that we've got this screen here. Now what I'm going to do is try to skew it into place. I'm going to go to Transform, Control-T first, get it down to approximately the right size. And then I think I might actually do Transform and Warp. This allows us to kind of push edges of it into place and really get it to fit properly. I think that looks pretty good. And of course we're going over the top here, so if we want to, we can create a mask. And with the paintbrush, we can simply paint out the area. Now, this corner probably shouldn't be so low down here. So I'm gonna once again go to Edit, Transform, Warp, and let's just push that up a little bit. All right, so next we need to tackle the dashboard. And what I've done here is, as you can see, I have created a path using the pen tool around this dashboard here. And this is going to allow us to paste some other dashboard onto this. I feel like this dashboard looks super cheesy. So what I have done is I have gone online, I got a picture of carbon fiber, and I'm simply going to paste this onto the dashboard. So as you can see here, I have pasted this carbon fiber look on top, and I'm purposefully making it pretty dark. I just don't want to call much attention to the dashboard. I think that makes it really look like a toy when it's really bright like that. So I'm just keeping it dark. Want to keep people's eyes away from that. All right, next up, let's add some brake lights to this car. Obviously, I don't know exactly what the Tesla brake lights are going to look like. I've watched some of the footage from the reveal of this car. I've gotten a little idea of what they look like, and I don't think the average person would really know anyway. So we can kind of take some artistic freedom here and do what we want. I am going to add a brake light here along this line. We can also add one to the center here. And then I'm going to add some sort of brake light, probably from another car, to this dark area right here. Now, to do that, first of all, what I need to do is use the pen tool and cut out this light. So what I'm going to do is I am going to grab the pen tool and just create a shape that kind of follows the edge of this line here. Now, if I had to create a brake light from memory, I'm sure I would do a horrible job. Let me go online and find a brake light illuminated, just a picture that already exists online. That's going to make this a lot easier. So as you can see, I found this image of an illuminated rear tail light here. This is going to give us some colors that we can work off of. This is the brightest color here, and this might actually be pure white, but you'll also notice that it goes very quickly to an orange or a yellow tone. That is what I'm going to fill this with first. So I am going to first create a new layer here. I am going to right click on this, make selection, 2 pixel feather, sounds good. then using the eyedropper tool here, I am going to grab one of these really bright colors. Maybe I don't want pure white, but I want it to be very close to pure white, just a little bit of yellow there. And then I'm going to grab the paintbrush and I'm just going to paint this in. And as you can see, if we just look at this, right now it doesn't look realistic at all. It just looks like you know, a white line or something. To make it look realistic, what we're going to have to do is start creating layers with these orange colors and start blurring them. So what I am going to do is create another layer, and I'm going to grab the eyedropper tool and we'll grab one of these darker orange colors here, and I can paint this on top. And even this isn't really the color that I'm looking for. So I'm gonna grab the eyedropper again and I'm gonna grab one of these deep reds and I'm gonna paint that on top. And now what I can do is I can blur this. So I'm on this layer with just the red and I can go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I can just start pushing this around until I'm getting the blur that I'm looking for here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start duplicating this layer. I can just drag this down and duplicate it, and as you can see, it's adding this halo to everything. It looks a lot more realistic. And now what I can do is I can go in and grab that original layer, layer 9, and drag it to the top, and you can see it adds a much more realistic glow to this tail light. Now, to make it even more realistic, what I can do is I can go in here and just grab some of these blurred layers and I can blur them more or less. So if I wanted to add an additional Gaussian blur here, I could do that. I could also come in, I could hit like Control U, and I could start messing with the hue of just one of the layers, add a little bit more orange to it. Basically, it's all the layers on top of each other that are going to make this look realistic. Now, I'm starting to get very unorganized here with all my layers and what they're called and everything. If you want to, you can highlight a bunch of these and you can click on the little folder down here. It's called a bin in Photoshop. And it's going to create a group 1 here. We will call this rear tail lights. That's going to make things a little bit easier to deal with when we have tons of layers in the future. Now, I'm actually just gonna grab one of these taillights and I'm going to fit it into this slot here. I think that might look good. I'm going to use the quick selection tool and just highlight this one here. I did a pretty good job. I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, and let's start fitting this into place here. I'm just hitting Control T for transform. And then I'm probably gonna once again go to warp. All right, so I played around with this a little bit. I ended up using a smaller portion, just the back part of this light. I think that looks a little bit better. And as you can see, I just masked it out. I've also added a blur on top of this the exact same way that I did this light down here. And I think that looks pretty good, especially when you zoom out here. All right, for the sake of time, I've just fast forwarded here and you guys can see that I've also created a center brake light here in the exact same way. So I've got a white light that's a little blurry and then a red light that's behind it, and it looks like it is a glowing tail light. Okay, next up, I am noticing that the paint on the back of this car is looking nice and saturated, but on the front here, it's looking very, very dull. This is actually a super easy fix, especially because we already have these paths made. What I need to do is right click on the car cutout that we have here. I'm going to make selection, 2 pixel feathers, probably good. I can create a new layer, Control Shift N. And then what I can do is I can grab this rich color here using the eyedropper tool, and I can simply paint on top of the hood here. And I don't want to hit the glass. And then all you have to do is come down to the blending mode and change this to color. And this might be a little bit too saturated for you, but you can simply lower the opacity here. This is all the way down to 0, but we can just bump up the color a little bit, making the car look a little bit more uniform. And if I missed a spot here, I can simply come in and paint that back. And you can see I'm kind of hitting the glass here. So if I want to undo that, I can switch this to black and just paint it back out. Okay, something else that is making this look like a toy car are these huge panel gaps. A real car would have panel gaps that look probably more like this. So we need to make these panel gaps a little bit tighter. Now guys, try not to pay attention to all my layers in Photoshop here. I'm trying to teach this as quickly as possible. I've already done this before, and so my layers are kind of completely whacked out because I did it a little bit differently before. I'm trying to teach it more quickly this time. But you can hit Control-Shift-Alt-E, copy everything down into one flat layer. And I am going to use the pen tool here, and I am going to drag along this door here. I definitely want to get the black part of this panel gap in my selection. I'm not being super precise because I'm just selecting this kind of black area that I don't think you're going to be able to see. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I could call this like door gap. I could select this. 2 pixels is probably fine. Probably doesn't really matter here. And I'm going to hit Control-C, Control-V. And what that's doing is it's creating another door right on top of this. So you can see if I move it here, we've got this other door. I'm going to hit Control-Z to get it back in that spot. And then using the arrow keys, I'm just going to push the door over. You see I'm closing up that panel gap. Now, I have to watch out to make sure that I can't see the seam of my selection over here, but I don't think I can. And if I could, like let's say for instance, I'm just gonna hit Control-U and make this look wacky so that you can see it. If I could see this, all I have to do is create a mask and then paint away that seam there. And you know, you could just create a larger, softer brush and you could paint it away like that. And that should look perfect. But I don't even think that we have to do that because it looks perfect to me. I do not see any seam there. So that is the easiest way I have found to fix the panel gap. So I'm gonna go around now and I'm just gonna push in all of these different panel gaps. And then the other thing that you'll notice that's weird about this is you can see this edge here. I think the easiest way to fix this is with dodging and burning. So we could create another layer and dodge and burn on that. Just for the sake of simplicity here, I'm just gonna hit Control-Shift-Alt-E and create a layer with everything. And what I can do is I can just kind of go in and dodge on the dark area and burn on the bright area. So if I go here and I go to, let's see, we will burn this area first. See, I'm just darkening that up just a littlest bit. What I want to do is dodge this area just a little bit. It's just making it so your eye doesn't go quite to it. And then if you want to, you can use the exact same technique that I taught you before about the color if you wanted to add the color back in. But if we go back and just look at the way this looked before and after, it's already looking much, much better. So I'm going to go around the car and I'm going to do this to all of the panel gaps and try to make it a little bit more realistic looking. All right, so I think I've got the panel gaps looking a lot better here. The next thing I want to show you guys is how to add movement to the car, especially if we want the wheels to be turning, we want it to look like the car's racing forward. This is actually relatively easy to do. The first thing that I'm going to do is create selections around both of these wheels. All right, as you can see, I've created a path here around the wheel. I'll just name this front tire. I'm going to create a selection. And just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to copy and paste this and just make it its own layer here. And I'm going to select it one more time. So now this is its own layer and I have it selected. I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur, Radial Blur. Now, if I leave it here in the middle, you'll see what's going to happen. The middle of this selection is probably here, which is not what we want. So I'm going to click that. And as you can see, it's a little off. It's like blurring it down here rather than right on the middle of the wheel. So I'm going to undo that, and you just kind of have to move this around and get this right in the middle. So that's a lot better. And then you just have to play with how much of a blur you want. So that was 10. If I go up to blur, radial blur, let's just see what 20 looks like. That might be a little bit much. No, I mean, it's not bad. It's not bad. Okay, 20 might work for this. So I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing for the back wheel as well. All right, so I have both wheels moving now. I think that looks pretty good, pretty realistic. But if you were to actually photograph a car moving as quickly as we hope this car can move, you're probably going to have a sharp car and at least slightly blurry ground. Right now, our ground is so sharp, it doesn't look very realistic. So what we need to do is we need to blur out the ground. And to do that, we are going to use a blur tool for the ground, and we're going to be using the paths that we have used for these car cutouts and everything, so that we are blurring the ground and not the car. I am going to right click on this and make a selection. 2 pixels is fine. I am then going to go to select and inverse because I want to select everything other than the car. I am going to create a new layer here. So I now have everything selected other than the car, and I can go to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur. And what I want to do is I want to get this line even with the line of the direction that the car is moving. And I can actually look at this line that we have up here, and I don't want that to be blurry. And if I do, just a little bit blurry. Maybe something like that. And then I can mess with the distance here, and I just want to add a little bit of movement to this ground. If you go too much, it looks very unrealistic. All right, I think that's looking pretty good. Obviously, you'll notice that our wheels are not blurred as well as they should be. I can mess with that in a little bit, but that's looking pretty realistic. All right, so I've gone online and I've found just a picture of smoke here. It's not very high res, but it doesn't need to be because we're gonna make this super, super faint here. First of all, what I wanna do is change the blending layer. Let's just do screen. And you can see we could start kind of placing this where we think smoke might be. And we are really going to lower the opacity on this. We want it to be super, super faint. And even this, now that I'm looking at it, this smoke is like, it's just too thick. So I'm probably going to grab another type of smoke that maybe isn't quite as thick as that. It's looking a little too heavy-handed. So here's some other smoke. We'll set this to screen. That's looking a little better maybe. To lower the saturation on that. And by changing the size of this, like we could duplicate it, make it a lot bigger, flip it. There's just so much we can do here. Add a mask and start painting out tons of it, you know. This one we also need to add a mask on. Give me just a second to mess with this, and I'm gonna come up with something that's a lot fainter than this. All right, so here you can see kind of what I've done here. We've got the motion of the ground, the wheels, and just added a little bit of smoke. I've also gone in and just added some tire tracks. Super easy, I'm sure you guys know how to do that. Same way that I've done it with the smoke, just lowering the opacity, getting it right behind the wheels here. But I think that looks super cool. It starts to add a lot more motion to this car. All right, I think I'm about done with the edit on this first image, and I think with this being on pure white, it looks kind of cool the way it is. I mean, it looks like a graphic image. Maybe it was taken in the studio. Maybe it is, you know, computer graphics or something, but I think it looks pretty cool. I've also been playing around with adding some different backgrounds behind the car. I think personally, I might like this one, just kind of a blurry concrete wall I put back there. Obviously, there's a few problems along the outside of this, but I can easily crop it. And just make sure that you have delete cropped pixels unchecked, and you can always undo whatever you want when it comes to cropping. And let's do a ratio of 16:9 here. So I think this looks pretty cool. Obviously, there's a million more things that we could do to this image. I could add the front headlight on. I could add somebody actually driving the car. I also have that rear center brake light on while the wheels are moving, which doesn't really make sense. I probably want to turn that off for the moving shot of this car. But I think this shot looks pretty cool, especially for a toy car. But we're not done, because I actually want to cut this car out and put it on some sort of other background. So let's head outside and let's see if I can get a better background plate that looks a little bit more realistic than this, and let's see what we can do. So I've been driving around trying to find a hill that I can shoot down on a road, and I found a couple of places, but they don't look very good. But right up here in front of me is my buddy's house, and he actually has a wall that I think I can climb up on and shoot down on a road. Let's see if this works. All right, I think this might work. I'm going to grab my camera, and because I don't know the exact height, I'm going to shoot pictures all the way up and down this hill, just to give me options when we get back to the computer. All right, so I've been through my road shots, and I think this might be the best one. It's certainly not that exciting. We've also got this like concrete ditch along the bottom. But my hope is that we can blur this and make it a little bit more interesting. I have cut out the bottom of the car with the shadow below it here. And then I've also cut out the top of the car itself. It's on another layer. So we will deal with that in just one second. First, let's see. Let me try to clone this thing out that's back here. I'm going to use the spot healing brush. We don't have to be too precise because we're going to blur all this anyway. Now, I'm just going to drop this car in real quick. I don't even know if this is a good spot for it. Let's see. Put it like there, just so that we can look at the background, because we want that background to be blurred. Now, you might think that I'm going to go up to blur and motion blur, but this road is kind of turning. You would imagine that the photographer would be moving in some arc motion. So instead, we are going to go to blur gallery and path blur. And what we can do is we can actually draw a path that the blur will take. So maybe we kind of want to follow this road a little bit, and then we can start messing with the blur speed. Obviously way too much there. Now, as you can see, we're getting some reflections and stuff down here that don't look realistic at all. So we need to do something about this layer. I'm going to change it to overlay, and that actually looks pretty good. There's a small reflection here, but I don't know that you can really see it too much. I think that looks pretty good. I'm holding shift to grab both of these layers, and I can just move this car around. You'll notice it looks like a toy car over here, and that looks like a gigantic car over here. So I'm trying to find like the perfect spot where this car would actually look like a realistic size. And then do I want the car to look like it's on a, a really small road and it's kind of in the middle of the road? Would it be hugging the side? I'm not exactly sure. I think this is a relatively realistic spot, but as I rotate this car here to kind of make it fit on the road, you're messing with the perspective of the car. If the car was turned further away from the camera, this far side would be smaller, and so you don't want to do gigantic movements, or it's going to look super fake. But if we do little movements, there are a few tricks in Photoshop that may work. Let's see if we can pull this off. I am going to try to perspective warp this car. I'm going to go to Edit and Perspective Warp. And what we have to do is we have to create the three-dimensional drawing for Photoshop of like where this car is in space. So now I can click on Warp up here and I can start warping this car just the littlest bit. Remember, we tilted the car so this side would be further away. This side might be a little bit bigger as well. Let's just hit OK and see what this looks like. So this is looking a little bit more realistic, but it still looks like this car is kind of cut off and planted right here because this is a reflective car and there's a lot going on in this background, but none of it is actually being reflected in the car. So what we need to do is we need to start grabbing elements of the background, skewing it, and then placing it on top of the car so that we'll get these realistic reflections. One of the things that might reflect is, you know, this dark road here and then this white line. That might reflect in the side of the car. You might be able to see a little bit of grass in the side of the car. You're going to be able to see the trees in the front or, you know, maybe in the glass of the car. So let's start messing with that a little bit. I'm just going to grab this background here. And I'm going to Control C, Control V. I'm going to move this up to the top and just start placing this. I'm going to lower the opacity so that I can see it here. And I am going to start rotating this. And let's mess with the blending mode here. So at least in the glass, it's looking like maybe the vivid light might be the best to work with. And I'm just gonna rotate this to where, you know, I think it would look somewhat realistic. And then we can really start skewing this. You know, maybe it'd be something like that. And then we can create a mask here and just start painting away what we don't want. All right, as I'm looking at this, I feel like maybe we could blur the background even more. I'm just gonna duplicate this so we have options here. And once again, I'm gonna go back to Filter, Blur Gallery, Path Blur, and let's see what we can come up with here. All right, to anchor this car to the road, I think we need to add some sort of artifact, smoke, dust. I've got just a couple of very simple images here. This is just black with white speckles. I am going to first set this to screen. I'll hit Control L, crush those blacks so it's just the white spots that are showing up here. And let's start blurring this. All right, I think that looks pretty good. And I'm just going to start copying this and put it around each tire, something like that. And then I'm going to hit Control E, and make this all one layer, and then create a mask and just start painting out what I don't need. That looks pretty good. And then I've got this random smoke picture here. We're gonna do something kind of similar. Let's do screen. And once again, I will go to levels and just push that black out of the shot, duplicate it and put it on that tire, and I'll duplicate it again. Maybe we will put it that, and then we're gonna start messing with the opacity here and really take it down. I'm gonna rotate this, put it kind of around the back of the car a little bit. And now we will start painting out the mask what doesn't look good. All right, I think we're all set for the final step of this image and the final sponsor for today's video, which is Exposure X5. For a lot of people, Exposure X5 could replace Lightroom. You can actually cull through images and edit tons of images. They give you lots and lots of features for editing photographs. I personally use it to finish every one of my photographs and give my images a look. And when you're compositing two images that are not taken at the same time of day, or in this case, not even in real life, a toy car with this realistic background, it just doesn't look quite right because the colors don't match perfectly. You know, we've got these really bright reds and then the background, it just doesn't look as vibrant. I'm not exactly sure, but if we can add an effect over this entire image, it will help bring everything together. We can also add other effects like lens flares or light bleeds onto this that will fade from the background into the car, and I think that will really help to bring this whole image together as well. So let's go ahead and open this up. Now this software can be used as a standalone program. I personally love using it as a Photoshop plugin, and what's so cool about this software is that it can replicate film. So I have a bunch of my favorite films here, but if I click on all, you'll see that we could create a black and white image, and each one of these presets looks awesome as it is. I actually never even considered this to be a black and white image, but some of these look really, really awesome. Might have to consider that for another edit. But if you want color film, for instance, cinema, there are just so many different effects, and you can just hover your mouse over these effects, and every single one of them just looks awesome. Now it's going to take me a second to go through these and try to figure out which one of these works best for this car. So give me just 1 second. All right, so I am digging the Fuji Velvia 50 here. And I think this is a little bit heavy-handed, but we can come in here and we can tone that down if we want to. You can see here with the opacity, I can change how much I want this effect to actually show up on this image. I think somewhere around 50 or 60% is a little bit better. And I'm liking what it's doing to the grass and the road, but it's really pushing these reds a little bit too far in my opinion. So what we can do is we can come down to color here and we can start fine tuning how this is affecting our colors. So you can see I can grab the reds and I can just affect the reds. Now if we continue going down, we can start adding lighting effects as well, and we can change the lighting effects. We can also move the lighting effects around if we want to. Let me show you what I mean here. So we have natural sunlight coming from the back of the frame towards the camera. So if I wanted to add some sort of lighting effect, it would probably be up here. You can also change the size of these lighting effects as well. I don't want to go too crazy with it, but at the same time, I do want it to look like it's kind of going over the car at least a little bit here. All right, I think this corner 7 looks pretty good. I can lower the opacity because it's on a different layer. I can add a layer if I want to. I'm not sure if I want to deal with other effects here, but what you can do is you can actually go in and add haze and stuff. And this can also really help make it look like the car is really planted to the ground because you have these effects that's going over both the background and the foreground. Interesting, you can kind of make it look like a foggy day or something. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just playing with this sun flare. Now, because I've added the sun flare, it's killed a little bit of our contrast here, so I can go back to this layer, just start pushing the blacks back a little bit. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's hit apply. Now, of course, we could go in, we could crop it a little bit. Maybe I'll crop it at a 16:9 aspect ratio. Now, the absolute final step that we could do, we could come in here and start dodging and burning this if we wanted to. I might just burn some of these edges just a little bit, bring a little bit more attention to the car rather than the trees and everything. Dodge just a little bit, a little brighter. All right, guys, that wraps up this video. Here are the two finished images, and I like them both. I might actually prefer the first one with the car and the cookie sheet to the final composite, but they're both cool. They're both totally different. Now, what's great about all of these tips and tricks in Photoshop that I've showed you is that they work for toy cars, but they also work for the real thing. I've shot full-size cars before. I do the exact same technique. So whether you're shooting toys or you're shooting the real thing, hopefully this will help you guys out with your photography. If you'd like more information just like this on a daily basis, you can head over to fstoppers.com. And if you'd like to check out our full-length photography tutorials, head over to fstoppers.com/store. We have tutorials like this that go way, way deeper. If you're into this sort of thing, you're gonna love that.